Hi, this is Aisha, and welcome to a new book review of Readadayclub. Today, I will be talking about a very absurd and visceral book, and it's also one of the best books that I have read this year, and that is No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai. Now, No Longer Human is a story about a man who grows up feeling heavy contempt for human beings. But this contempt is driven more by his own fears, his own insecurities, loneliness, unhappiness, than by anger or resentment alone. You can also read this book as a partially autobiographical story because it draws from Dazai's personal life experiences. And another fact that gives a momentum to the book and context to the writer's life is the fact that Osamu Dazai committed suicide soon after the book's publication. So suicide also plays a very important role in the fabric of the story. Now the book weaves together fear, anxiety and dread as focal points, and everything that characterizes the protagonist throughout the story has somehow more depth and understanding because of those qualities. And the thing that characterizes the protagonist the most is his troubled and anguished state of mind. Everything he says or does or feels is a reflection of his inability to cope with that psychological defect, to repair that psychological defect. The book also focuses on the meaning of being human, but it doesn't do this in a conventional format. It is methodical in that it characterizes a very a deeply cynical and alienated character. Now the protagonist Yozo is gripped to the very depths of his mind and spirit by this fear of human beings, and this includes everyone in his life: his family members, friends, lovers and strangers. Now when you dilute down this fear, you'll soon realize that Yozo was terribly afraid of himself as well and of his past. Now he possesses exactly the same bodily and emotional characteristics as those who he fears, and so he feels shackled to this role of being human, which in his psyche he finds terribly nauseating and revolting to identify with. With a story like this, I'm sure that many readers would wonder what happens next. What route does the writer take for the reader to get a broader and more universal understanding of the protagonist and the circumstances surrounding his relationships and his intentions with people. With No Longer Human, there is a part of you that does not want to wonder. You do not want to question what's happening in the story because you have to confront with certain answers that you may not be ready for. Now, reading a book like No Longer Human is in no way a passive experience. It is not a book with which you can simply unwind. It identifies with and navigates the mysterious and existential nerve of human nature, and yet it's deeply contemplative. There are plenty of complex and hidden arcs to explore in the story. It addresses the inner and outer manifestations of identity, what qualifies and disqualifies a human being from being human. Religion, morality, society, politics. The book tackles such vast institutions through a very psychological and objective lens, and through alcohol, prostitution, drug addiction, misanthropy. These are the tools that Yozo, the protagonist, uses in order to shield himself. But not once did I feel like the language of the story, was romanticized, which in my personal opinion makes the telling of such a complex and vulnerable story deeply sincere. Now, what No Longer Human does is it sheds light on social anxiety, social dysfunction, and depression at their most heightened state. The book's confessional tone of writing, its completely emotionally detached perspective, and a keen literary eye, with regards to highlighting the repulsive actions of the protagonist is something to look forward to. And that in itself makes a very strong case for why you need to read this fascinating book. Yozo grows up in an upper class family. He may not have been physically abandoned by his family members, but he was abandoned in invisible ways. Mentally, intellectually, emotionally, Yozo felt very misunderstood by his family, which was the major reason for his contempt and alienation. It's quite clear from the very beginning of the novel how alienated Yozo felt, And the effects of this alienation he felt most brutally as an adult, when he moved away from his village and into city life. In fact, there are very many instances in the book where, while he's living in the city and studying and not studying, he is sort of comparing himself to a social outcast and comparing his personal reality to prison life. Osamu Dazai sketches a portrait of a man who doesn't think of himself as a human being. In fact, he doesn't even think of himself as the exact opposite, which leaves the reader to pick up the pieces that fall somewhere between him being a monster and a ghost. And it's this very quality that is very satisfying for a reader, and also adds a lot of layers and a very concrete and solid structure to the story, making it very visceral, very intuitive, and deeply psychological. Osamu Dazai utilizes anguish and restlessness as the most ironic human qualities that define his character's intrinsic nature. And it is this social dysfunction that reaches to such an extreme point that it manifests in the way he also communicates with other people, feeling sorry for others and seeking justification for his non-humanness. Yozo reached to such an extreme point that he started to irreversibly internalize all the external world and everything that he did in his external reality as a curse. And this led him to also feel responsible for other people's misery and hopelessness, as if he deserves to feel all those things, which led him to condemn those who showed any sort of affection or concern towards him. Because the book also investigates the contradictory nature of the world, it conveys a very similar emotion to that of Notes of Underground by Dostoevsky and Yukio Mishima's Forbidden Colors. Now, in my podcast review of the book, I said that No Longer Human is one of the most honest novels I've ever read. It's tragic, it's dreadful, and it's deeply psychological in the way that Osamu Dazai has crafted such a layered and complex character. Recently, I also read in the New York Times book review that No Longer Human also offers something very permanent and beautiful to the reader, and I think that's very true. Now, you can listen to my podcast only review of the book on Spotify and Google Podcasts, and I've also written a very short 300 words review of No Longer Human on my Instagram page. I'll add all the relevant links in the description box below. So this is Aisha from readadayclub. I hope that you enjoyed watching this video. If you have any thoughts regarding this book or any other book that you think I might like, please leave a comment below. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time.